Hi folks, my name is Tomas Salas. I'm the production tech, scene shop manager, and set builder for Austin Community College Drama Department. Due to the COVID situation, we're not doing any productions this semester and most of our classes are being conducted online. I did come into the shop today to build a little transport wagon for one of our professors, and this will be a video of how I go about doing that. These are things I already had in the shop. I have these wheels here from another project, some bolts, washers, and then I've got some fence pickets that I actually brought from home. I've got this rod here, which I think was part of a curtain rod that I'm going to use for the axles of the wagon. This will be the base of the wagon. And then some 2x4s that I'll cut up for the framing of the wagon. I'm going to start with the base of the wagon, and I decided to make it 21 by 29 inches. You can make it whatever size you want. I picked this size because it's going to work for what the intended purposes of the wagon, which is to carry those supply kits for students out to the parking lot from inside the building so students can drive by and pick them up. The first thing I'm going to do is measure and mark the piece of plywood for the base of the wagon, and I know I wanted it to be 21 inches, so just find 21 inch on the tape measure from one end of the piece of plywood and mark it right there, and then lengthwise I wanted to be 29 inches, so we're gonna, I already have my mark there on the 29. The piece of plywood for the base of the wagon can be cut with a circular saw or with a table saw like this nice one that we have right here, but I decided to take the easy way out on this project and use our panel saw, which makes it easy because the panel saw already has tape measures built into it, and you can set it to whatever size you need and just pull the handle down on the saw once it's on and cut away. Make sure you have on your safety goggles, that way you don't get anything in your eye, and wear a mask too to keep the sawdust out of your lungs. First thing to do to help with that also is to turn on this vacuum right here. It's loud. That is connected to the saw. Next thing to do is to turn on the saw right there. All right, we've got the first cut made. Now I got to make the second cut. All right, we've got it set up for our second cut, so let's get that one done. The next thing I'm going to do is cut the 2x4s for the bottom of the wagon. The 2x4s will be used to frame out the bottom and to support the axles for the wagon wheels. I'm going to cut the 2x4s on this miter saw here. So the first thing, of course, is measure, and we want those at 21 inches. So I'll just put a little mark right there at 21. And I can cut them both at the same time. And this is a miter saw. You could also cut these, of course, with the circular saw, which is this thing right here. You could even do it on the table saw, but the quickest, easiest way is to do it on a miter saw. All right, those two are cut. Next thing to do is to attach the plywood to the two pieces of 2x4. And for that, I'm going to use this impact driver right here, which works awesome, and some screws and some glue. I'm going to put them probably at about 5 inches from the edge on this side, same thing on this other side. Why 5 inches? I don't know. I think no scientific reason. It just looks all right, like the right thing for me to do. If I'm not going to take something apart, I like to use plenty of glue. It makes the connection stronger. And so just make sure not to make a big mess. That should be enough right there. Now I can screw it down. I'm using 2.5-inch screws, so it'll go deep enough down into the 2x4. I've already got that one partially started to make it easier to shoot this video, but just sinking down. Always hold your drill gun straight up and down. Don't lean it this way or that way. Make sure it's straight up and down so the screw goes in. Put enough pressure to make sure the screw goes all the way into the plywood. I let it go in a little bit below the surface so that way it won't be in the way. And just repeat the process. I'm just going to use 3 screws on each one. I've got the 2x4 attached to the plywood for the back axle, and I actually ended up putting another little piece of plywood underneath to help stabilize it, and also as a spacer, because that's going to be important when I attach the front axle, which will have to be movable so that the wagon can turn. For the front axle of the wagon, I'm going to end up making a triangle out of these 3 pieces of 2x4 right here. And right here in the center, I'm going to attach the handle, which will be used to pull the wagon. But for now, I got to figure out my measurements and cuts so that I can make a triangle. And then once that's done, I can mount this front axle under the wagon. I've got the angles of my cuts marked on this 2x4, so now I have to set the saw by pushing this button down. And I have to set it so that the blade will cut my board at the right angle. As you can see there, to move it a little more. So I've got my boards cut to form the triangle for the front axle. And the next step is going to be to attach it to my plywood. So I went ahead and glued and screwed these 2 2x4s to this one at about 2¼ inch, more like 2 inches from each end. No particular scientific reason, just that I thought it would look okay right there. The important thing is to be consistent, to make sure it's the same distance here as on the other side, to keep it balanced. The next thing I'm going to do is attach this spacer piece of plywood to the top of this, and then I can attach it to the rest of the wagon floor. All right, next step is to attach this triangle front axle to the rest of the wagon, and I am going to do that by drilling a hole right in the center, so it'll go through this plywood and then this plywood as well. And then I'll put this bolt, a washer, and then on the bottom side, lock washer and a nut, and then tighten it up, and that will hold it in place and also allow this triangle to pivot to be able to turn the wagon. All right, next step is to drill this hole at 10½ inches, which is the center of the plywood, and about 4 inches back from the front of the plywood. And I'm going to drill this hole all the way through both pieces of plywood so that I can then put in the bolt and washers. The hole is drilled all the way through both pieces of plywood. I'm going to put this bolt in there, give it a little tap with a hammer. I tapped it all the way in because the bolt has a little square under the round side, and that sinks into the wood, and that'll keep it from turning when I attach the washers and bolts. Now that the bolt is in, I have to place a washer underneath and in between the other piece of plywood. So I'll put this washer, and this is going to allow the front axle to pivot and be able to turn the wagon when you're pulling it. So the washer goes right in there, and then this will be pushed back into that hole on the bottom piece of plywood. Now that the bolt is all the way through both pieces of plywood, I am going to add another washer. And a lock washer and a nut to keep it from falling out. You can just tighten that with a crescent wrench, C-wrench. Not too tight so that it'll still be able to pivot. Just going to give it a few turns. All right. There you go. That'll be able to turn. I'll probably put some powder or something in there just to make it swivel a little easier. The next step on this little wagon is going to be to build the walls, and the first thing I'm going to do is cut some of this fence picket right here to fit, one in front, one in back, like that. So I need to mark it and cut the two pieces for front and back, and then I'll cut the side pieces and mount them to the frame.